Good morning and welcome. What I thought I'd do today is first of all tell you my obvious biases. I'm in Canada because I grew up during the apartheid era. In other words, I lived through a period of the worst human discrimination ever, structurally and otherwise. That particular society suffered the onslaughts of the insults of slavery, followed by segregation, eugenics first, then segregation, then apartheid, institutionalized apartheid. So I only met white people when I was an old teenager. Before that, I was born in a black hospital, was going to be buried in a black grave, had to go to school with a license in order to be on campus. Did well, but I still needed my license to be there. Maybe we were 3 out of 1,000 in the class, type of thing in the classes. So I needed to understand the race and racialization. And what I'm going to do today is show you why I believe that this black-white racism, before I even go there, let me tell you, I've been discriminated against by white people. I've also been discriminated against by black people. Part of the reason why I'm here is because I was discriminated against by black people. At one stage they told me, now only if you were black enough, we would give you the post. So you can see, we live in a funny world. You go to any part of the world, especially Euro-American societies, and you interview people of color, they will tell you they feel it, including Canada. If anybody in this class argues differently, they're lying. The stats in sociology shows us that the same thing happens in Canada. But what I'm going to do today is different. I'm going to show you why I believe it's going to eventually, slowly dissipate. And there'll be less of a racial issue maybe 100 years from now, 200 years from now, certainly. And the first is, I'm going to show you some of the features that brought on this form of racism that we live under. The first is that race is a constructed category. It has no biological basis. There were some intellectuals in the past, mostly from Germany and so on, that contributed to categorization according to race. Caucasian, Asian, not black, Ethiopian, Malaysian, and you'll be surprised to learn, and this is also for my friends back there that believe that they call Malaysians because their forefathers come from Malaysia. No, they call Malaysian because that was the category, one of the categorizations of race. The people came from places like Indonesia, few of them from Malaysia, many of them from Bangladesh, many of them from other parts of the East Asian continent, and ended up with the title, oh, we Malaysians. I was a Malaysian once, for most of my life, and that is because that was a centuries-old category set by those in power. So that's the first, and I'm going to show you later on, we may have argued that before, how race is a constructed phenomenon rather than a biological category. So that's the first. Somebody comes along and sets up this nomenclature that becomes the language of the world, that becomes the heuristic, not the heuristics as well, but becomes the hermeneutics, the interpretation of existence, the understanding of human existence. And it was extremely difficult up until recently to escape that form of understanding. That form of language usage, that embedded political terminologies towards human beings categorizing each other. So why am I saying that I believe that it will slowly die out? It may never disappear completely, that takes a long time, but it's not going to be a major issue in the future. And the first is because there's a relationship between power and the way constructions of knowledge and categorizations are made. And for the last 500 years, the power sat with European societies. So you can see history is an interesting kind of subject in that you can never calculate the future. Even this lecture here have high probability of being correct, I think. But I can't be absolute. Because institutions come together in very different ways at different times in history. But more so, we don't calculate the accidents of history. Who would have anticipated 20 years ago that Ukraine would be in a war against the Russians? Or America, Israel against Iran? Those are accidents, unexpected calculations that wasn't there a few years ago. We wouldn't have thought that we'd be at this point in history. This is the nature of history. So what I can do is a bit of historical sociology to show you that we had the Spanish Empire, and then we moved to the Dutch, and then we moved to the British, and then we moved to the American USA as major power bases in the world, where the main universities, knowledge centers, etc. sits and is propagated. And what's interesting about our 500-year history of the construction of where we are today is that over here in the Spanish period, the main technology was labor. And in this case, slave labor. They needed those slaves to work the sugar plantations in South America, for example, with expansion of the Spanish colonies and so on. This technology of labor, slave labor, certainly built the Spanish Empire, and with that was a legitimation in order to justify race. And in this case, black labor from Africa and other parts of the world, but mostly black laborers to the southern parts of, for example, as an example, South America. The technology shifts somewhat to the Dutch when they become the major empire from the 1600s, late 1500s, 1600s onwards. And for them, it is wind and sails. So shipping becomes major part of the Dutch. They built the biggest corporation in the world, the Oost-Indische Compagnie, or the Dutch East India Company. Up until today, there's no corporation that even comes close to the size that they developed in their heyday. Want to learn more about that? Read a book by Sharma called Embarrassment of Riches. The point I'm trying to make here is it was the heyday of colonization. May have been wind, but colonizing and getting to other parts of the world and extracting from those parts of the world resources through this new colonized form, and the continuation of subjugation of peoples through slave labor. Comes the British, and in this case, industrial technology, coupled with labor, naval prowess, and so on. It's a continuation. Then American petro era. The continuation, you can see, you read in American history, black slave labor. Without that, there's no cotton farming, there's no labor in the South. They move away from that, industrial developments. They can see as they move on in the empires, they kind of build on the past. And in the end, you have what we have, 500 years of legitimation of blackness as being subjugated, as being othered, as being different. It suited all these empires' economic needs to have black people subjugated. But they weren't alone, they had help. And I'm sorry if it hurts your sensibilities, but Christianity was a major force towards the further institutionalization of implementing racial discrimination, be it in residential schools in Canada, be it in positions of power within the church, only held by white people, making Jesus white, for example. Guy from the Middle East is really brown. But you can see how this continuation and socialization processes coming from all sorts of walks of life, including education. As I explained to you, I had a license around my neck while I was a student. I'm not saying this for fun, but yes, I was the best student on the university campus, but I had a license around my neck. For all my 99% average in the BSc, in the medicine sciences, I needed a license. The point I'm trying to make here is, you can see the strength of 500 years of building a form of discrimination on earth. Why is it going to leave us? One, we have a phenomenon now and an argument that empires are going to shift. There'll be at minimum multipolar regions of the world. So as soon as empire is in positions of strength, they insist on their ideologies, their cultures, etc., including forms of racism, with the potential of Chinese, American, Russian, Iranian future. We're going to see a multipolar world, and hence a diminution, a slowing down of kind of cultural investments from a single source. That's first. Second, and this is very important, so the first would be multipolar world, and the second would be demographics, age demographics. 25% of Canadians will be over 65 within the next 5 years. 25% are already over 60. So age. These empires is declining as the brown world grows. That's a definite contribution. Third would be forms of multiculturalism, globalization. In other words, theoretically, all scholars agree that as soon as you mix with other people, you very quickly realize that you're not that different, and that we all kind of can contribute. So you can see that we are fast moving in this world of multiculturalism, not only in Canada where it's instituted, where we are the model to the rest of the world in terms of an ideology. We were the first in the world to have multiculturalism as a political idea, combined with institutions in the legal sphere to make sure that we don't discriminate. Of course, in reality, it's not exactly like that, but at least we have it in our constitution, be that the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, a constitution, everything in Canada geared away from being a racist society, but rather an accepting society of everyone as equal. But certainly globalization and the mixing of other peoples reduces kind of racial tensions. Now let me give you a definition here. When I discriminate against somebody else, that is discrimination. But when my society, my structure, let's say I'm white, in my white society, when I discriminate against somebody else, that's racial discrimination. Because my discrimination is supported by the structures within society. It's a slight difference. If Lawrence discriminates against me, it's going to be kind of discrimination. But when I discriminate against Lawrence, let's say Lawrence is an international student, then that is racial discrimination, because everything that I come with supports my backing, my power, etc. So you can see we are definitely on a trajectory where this relationship between empire, state, and its peoples and its cultures are kind of shifting after a 500 year of white domination in the world. Hence my argument that the future looks brown. Thanks, Dylan.